So in this next video, we want to explore the situations where we want to have multiple conditions being true or false instead of just a single value, a single condition. So there's a few functions that fall under the logical set of functions, and they are AND, checks whether all arguments are true and then returns true if all arguments are true. OR, which checks with whether any of the arguments are true and returns true if any of them are true, and only returns false if everything is false. And then there's NOT, which changes false to true and true to false. So let's start with NOT because it's a fairly easy one. So we go NOT of true, we get false, and similarly for NOT of false, we get true. So sometimes using NOT will make things a little bit easier to read, where you just want to flip whether something's true or false. Next case we want to look at is AND. So when we look at the syntax, it has a logical, a comma, then more logicals. So if 1 is less than 3 and 2 is less than 5, so let's just evaluate these by hand first. 1 is less than 3, which is true, and 2 is less than 5, which is also true. So this should mean that the whole thing is true. So what AND does is it checks each individual one, and if all of them are true, then AND will be true. Alright, so let's go back to our example before. So age has ID and can drink. So we can be 18 but not have ID. And so if and this 18 is greater than or equal to 18, and our second condition is just this one, so this is already a true or false value, so we don't need to make it a relational statement. Can drink, and otherwise can't drink. So we've stuck this AND inside of the if so that we have to have two conditions being true for the whole thing to be true. So this person can't drink even though they're 18 because they don't have any ID. So if we change this value to true, they can now drink. Alright. Similarly, if we change this to 17, they now can't drink even though they have ID, because both of these conditions need to be true for the whole thing to be true. Alright. So that's our AND. Similar to AND, we have OR. So OR requires multiple logicals. So this time 1 is less than 3 and 5 is less than 3. So if we're looking at this example, this first one is true and the second one is false. But OR only needs one of the values to be true for the whole thing to be true. Right? So it doesn't matter which one. So we can flip that one and we can flip this one. So it's now the first one is false and the second one is true, but it's still true. And yeah, we can add multiple onto here so that it doesn't matter which one it is, as long as one of these is true. So 3 equals 3, still true. Doesn't matter what these values now are. Okay, so AND, OR, and NOT. AND, OR, and NOT are useful tools to get multiple sets of true or false, or flip a true or a false when you see one. The final thing that I want to show you is that sometimes you want to put an if statement inside of an if statement. You can do this. It just starts to look a bit messy. So has ID and drink. So the same example that we had before, 18 doesn't have ID can drink. So before we have an and inside of an if, this time we're going to do an if inside of an if. So if that is greater than or equal to 18, the value is true is going to be an if this value is true, then can drink, else can't drink. And if that one is false, then that one's also going to be can't drink. Right? So that looks a lot more complex than the first one that we had. Right? So, but it's functionally the same. So both of these have to be true for it to be for the person to drink. All right. So this is where we start getting into multiple solutions for the same problem. This is a fairly trivial problem, and we've got two very different solutions. All right. So you can stack if statements inside of each other. It might not be the best way to solve a problem, but it is a way to solve a problem, and sometimes you'll be forced to do this. But let's just have a let's just double check that all our logic is correct. So when we're reading this one, let's start here. So if A2 is greater than or equal to 18, so we check this value. If that's true, then we evaluate the true case, which is another if statement by itself. So in this case, we're going to have if that first one is true, then the second one gets evaluated. So if that value there is true, we can drink, otherwise we can't drink. But in the case that this one was false, we don't even consider this if statement. We just go straight to can't drink. All right. So slightly different implementations, but the same thing overall.